I wish I knew how to quit you.
Then why don't you?
This is Codependent Content, a podcast where my partner and I discuss the TV shows, movies, and video games in which we've formed an unhealthy relationship. My name is Mattias, and my co-host is Shannon Riley. Join us each week as we try to make sense of the media we continually give our hearts against our better judgment, and commiserate with us as we struggle and fail to let go of the characters, stories, and worlds that we are entangled with. Because just when we think we're done with content, it draws us back in.
Hey, Mattias, welcome to my podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any fun facts about what you did this week since it's Friday?
Nope. I've been editing a wedding video. That's about it.
I mean, that's fun.
I don't know what else. You've been around, Shannon.
I have been around, but our guests have not been around. Guests, welcome into our home. Welcome to our podcast. This is Codependent Content. My name is Shannon Riley. I'm with my partner, Mattias Segan, and we're here today to chit-chat about the final episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2.
Correct. The Season 2 finale.
Which is a true parter.
Okay, well, if you're new to the podcast, we spoil things from the very get-go. Sorry about that. If you have not seen the episode, this is probably now your chance to go see the episode before coming over here. Just so you know, we don't do like a section of non-spoilers and section of spoilers. It's pretty much spoilers all the way down. And as you heard here, it is technically a part one in the vein of the greats before it this year. The many part ones we've gotten, including Fast and Furious 10, Across the Spider-Verse, Mission Impossible, Dead Reckoning, which actually maybe has part one in the name, maybe doesn't. Who knows? The other ones did not, so we weren't sure. What else is a part one? I feel like we've had more.
There are way more part ones than this.
Barbie was a part. Just kidding.
No.
Oppenheimer, part one.
Do not. Oh my goodness. Well, yeah, I guess before we dive right in, is there any media we've been consuming that you want to let our listeners in on? I know we've been trying to get through Lost. We're in season 4 of Lost now, and a direct quote from Mattias was, "You didn't tell me it got good."
It got good, and then it got bad again.
He watched the episode The Constant, and then said it was good.
Time travel shenanigans I'm pretty much into.
Mm-hmm.
As you can tell, we had a lot of fun talking about the time travel shenanigans in Star Trek, even though they don't have... the rules are weird. In terms of Star Trek, we've talked about that.
Yeah.
In Lost, it's much more fun because it's not time travel, but it is time travel, and that's a lot of fun. And also, they're off the island, so that's great. You know, what a great way to push a show forward. I'm sure. Again, this is 20 years old now, like almost. It's like 15 years old show, right? So this is nothing new. People have seen Lost. People have been talking about Lost for decades now. And I guess always assumed in my head, since I've never seen it, that Lost always takes place on the island and stays on the island, because the last I left off on Lost, like, they don't leave the island, and especially knowing how it ends, and like it doesn't make sense for them to leave the island. So it's even more frustrating because I know how it ends, but also, like, at the time, what a great way to, change up the show. I think they've done a really good job. But you've also mentioned that this is the season that suffered from the writer's strike, according to some reports. So maybe the back half is not going to be as good. I don't know. And I mean, here's the thing, is like, I guess whether these things pan out is really the test of the writing, right? Mm-hmm. Because you can, as we know, you can introduce a whole lot of things and have like a lot of good ideas, but if you don't pay them off, it's just not going to work. And so therefore, I think that's the main thing, is like, we're seeing some good ideas, but if these are people who were not intimately familiar with what was going on, I can see how that would not pay off near the end of the
Yeah.
season or going on to later seasons, it does feel like there's a lot of things where I'm like, oh, we had introduced this thing. Why don't we make it this instead? Interesting idea, but the consistency or the contradictory nature of it, as opposed to like what came before, makes it very, very interesting. Again, spoilers. I am specifically thinking about how the others are taking people, and it ends up being revealed that it's about like the pregnancy stuff, but then it doesn't make sense how that fits into Dharma, and also how it fits into Ben. Like, what is Ben's ultimate thing? Because like, so he's been here for like, since almost he was born on the island. He likes to say he was, but almost he was born on the island, and he's been here since he was a child. And so Dharma was doing things, but then it's less about that and more about like what the others wanted. But how did the others want that? Like, why do they want this, and what's their ultimate? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like that. Like, it doesn't tie back to like what we initially thought was going on with them. It's
Right.
like, great idea, but then when you reveal like the backstory of like how they got here and all that kind of stuff, I'm like, well, that like, what is how is this actually tying together? It doesn't make any sense. So we'll see if it continues to do that or whatever. You're just nodding your head because I'm sure like people have had these conversations. I'm new to the thing.
I love hearing you say these things for the first time, and I just don't want to. I have a bad habit of kind of like pre-spoiling things for Mattias when we watch, because I'm like, oh, and then I feel like I clue you into like looking for something that's going to come up again later in the episode. So I don't want to say anything except for that we get off the rails, but the questions that you have like eventually sort of tie together. And one thing I will say is that it's interesting. I feel like every season we add a new concept of other, which I think is why I was so, during Yellow Jackets, I was like, there has to be others, because every season of Lost has been like either the camp is split into two, or we meet the others on the island, or now we're split into fractions and now we met people on a boat and they're others. Like every season you're meeting new people to be antagonists. I have to ask, you had a little bit of a,
well, again, I think it's different for Yellow Jackets. Like, you keep comparing it to Lost, but like, again, Yellow Jackets is trying to do something completely different, and Lost isn't like the Bible of like how to tell a story or how to do a mystery box. Like, the fact that like you say there has to be others is not true, because like there doesn't have to be others.
Right.
That's just because that's what Lost did does not mean like every other story has to, or every other mystery box show has to have this certain element. And you're like, oh, the hatch. I was like, it's not. It's not a hatch. It's a similarity, but it's not really like about like it's not trying to be Lost. So like to defend Yellow Jackets to a certain extent, like I don't think that.
No, I know.
I still think Lost does it really well. Like the idea of having like an antagonist or a very clear, I guess, conflict, obstacle to come across is definitely what Yellow Jackets is missing. Which is why you're probably searching for others, because like when all we have is like this supernatural force, and that might or might not be supernatural, and it's really just themselves that are the obstacle, or things like that. Like there's no real tangible thing for you to latch onto that at least Lost does, because at the very end of the day, a basic story thing is protagonists need conflict and an obstacle to overcome throughout the season or throughout the show. And we're not exactly sure the wilderness is technically an obstacle, but when we also know that they get through it, and like we are kind of seeing how we're not seeing like you can only do that so much. And it's like the first season worked really well because it was like, oh, the wilderness was a very huge obstacle. Like clearly, like just surviving is an obstacle.
True.
But now it's like, well, there's also these other things, but we don't know. We don't want to name it. We don't want to call it what it is or do whatever. So then it's like, well, what is you're introducing something, but not introducing it. Like you keep telling us and not telling us. So yeah, all that to say, Lost is again showing at least why it was so good at what it was doing, even if it didn't stick the landing.
Yeah,
so to
necessarily. One more question for you, Mattias. I would love to know, do you have a favorite character or a least favorite character in Lost?
I would say the characters are only as good as what the writers allow them to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so like every character has a way of like being my favorite characters. Like I love Jen, I love Saeed, I love Jack because it's for certain reasons, right?
Yeah.
I like Charlie, I like Hugo's great. You know, like but then when they do something that doesn't make sense for their character, or they like consistently stick to like this one note thing of like, this is who I am. So or like, this is what we're written as. So we have to make it, and all the manufactured tension that the Lost does a lot. It feels like makes them like not my favorite character, because I'm like, why are you doing or saying or reacting in this way? It doesn't make any sense to me. And then it's just because so we can have some tension, or so we can have some like something for the characters to like do or overcome or whatever. And they keep spinning wheels, you know, and then it becomes like non-characters to me, unfortunately.
I can see that.
So like I can't really have a favorite character because like they'll all of them will often do something that I'm like, that doesn't feel like realistic. Locke is the most interesting because at the very least he's always saying what I'm thinking when he comes up to certain situations, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But then like he's been stuck this whole season just doing this whole like, just listen to me and, you know, don't question it, you know,
right.
kind of thing. I'm like, there's times where you're completely transparent and honest and like saying exactly what the audience is thinking. And there's other times where you're just like being frustrating because the writers don't want to give anything away. They don't want to do it. You know,
right.
they can't have him be like, whatever. I'm like, this is a frustrating character. So this is, it's those little elements. I don't know. So yeah, we're talking a lot about Lost now, and so
I mean, you know, when we can move on from it. It's a lot of fun now that we're more than halfway through like your Lost journey. I just wanted to check in because, as you know, I was apprehensive that after the first season you weren't even going to really want to continue. The same way we kind of like fell off with Yellow Jackets. It's just not appealing. So it's really fun to see you still, even when the beats don't necessarily land, or even when players almost become NPCs in their own story. It's like there is something magnetic about Lost, even at its worst, that makes you wonder, like, what exactly is going on here? And I really think the storytelling capacity of like, not everyone loved it, but the flash forwards, the flash back, the flash sideways, like you get all of these different aspects to explore these characters in. And I think it just ingratiates you to them immediately. So that's great. That's our Lost Loft for now. Let's move into some Star Trek territory. If you're ready to engage thrusters with me, we will impulse drift toward our season finale. So again, this is Strange New Worlds, Season 2, Episode 10, Hegemony, which I had to Google how to pronounce because I didn't know. I was like, homogeny. So that, you know, probably says more about me than anything. So just a brief.
Do you want to tell people what that means or anything?
Nope.
What you know about?
Not yet.
Okay.
Nope. I want to talk about it later. Because it's the Gorn Hegemony, and I will talk about it later. So just a quick 30-second review. How do you feel after watching the season finale?
I'm honestly like, I'm pretty hype on this finale. I think it was pretty good. It was pretty solid in terms of like what it was trying to do is a tight episode. And I kind of wish the rest of the season had been more like this. There's some solid action. All the characters get like some like elements to kind of pay off their things, though. The season still being about these like relationships is still kind of like weird to me. And there's a few elements that I'm I still wish they wouldn't fudge, including this element of like war within Star Trek. Feels very, I don't know, pedestrian way to talk about war and to I guess, illustrate or visualize war, and how these characters. So, and we can get more on that later, but mostly it's just like, it feels like, I don't know, it's just kind of like, there's some really cool parts of this. And then, I think overall it's just I was mostly like, I really enjoyed this episode,
Great.
It didn't feel like a whole lot of things that I wasn't like into or felt like the writers were doing something. I was like, I don't think I understand what's going on here or whatever. So felt really solid throughout, but it sucks that it was a part one. I have a feeling that, as with most Star Trek, we'll come back to the part two in the first episode of season 3 or whatever, and then they're gonna wrap some things up, and then it will be back to like your normal scheduled programming. I'm like, well, that's not what I want either, Like, what is the point of this cliffhanger at all? Like, what exactly was the idea there? That I'm not really like understanding, like, why they couldn't have just wrapped it up if that's what you wanted to do, or do a 2-part finale, like, are you sure we're not getting another episode?
Well, they did only make 10 episodes, so
are you
yes.
Sure? You like look that up. There's no secret episode.
I guess there could be a secret episode, but even in interviews with like some of the directors and the producers, they speak about their 10 episode cap and that they already know where they're going with season 3 and how the first episode of season 3 will finish this story. So I don't think there's a secret episode. Wish there was. I think it would be really cool if, because they dropped those old scientists early, if there was that secret, like, nope, we are actually going to end on the day we said we were going to end. But no, I don't believe so. There's an energy around Star Trek to be continueds. And one of the most popular ones happens in Next Generation with Picard. You've heard of the Borg, right? Their
thing, yeah.
Yeah. Picard gets assimilated by the Borg. And one of the final shots of that season's finale is Picard coming out as Locutus.
Yeah.
And Will Riker needing to decide if he wants Worf to fire on the ship or not.
Yeah.
There are others, but I just feel like that one's probably the most iconic one.
This feels like a kind of 90s, even like early 80s, like cliffhanger, in terms of like television. It feels kind of like old school in that way to have that kind of like cliffhanger. I think the thing that bothers me the most about it is like in this time where we've had like part ones recently, like there's ways to kind of like do the cliffhanger and not do it. And like the Empire Strikes Back of it all, at least like certain things were resolved, and it was just kind of like the cliffhanger wasn't any like hanging story threads. I guess you could consider Han Solo part of that or whatever, but like you knew there was more to the story. There had to be, but at the very least, like all the character arcs were finalized, and it was more of a, I guess, spiritual cliffhanger, as opposed to like physical or whatever, like there was like this idea that you like, it was just this looking off into the distance of like, we know there's more to come and we have a lot to like do, but at least we've like landed and managed it so far. Whereas like this feels like, no, there's still a lot more. Like this, we didn't end where we started the episode and, or even the season, and we're literally just cutting off and then restarting, like in racing terms, this is like a red flag. It's like, we're doing a red flag. This is not like we're going to a new race. When we're doing, this is a red flag where we're like, we have to stop the race and then we have to start the race later on. And sometimes they'll do that, like for hours or whatever, right. And like, at least we get back to racing, but here we're not going to get it for like a year. It's like, you just
even longer,
you just stopped it, and we're not going to finish this episode for like a year and a half or something. That doesn't make any sense. So that said, while it feels old school in a way that like is cool, but the reason I don't like it, besides what I just said, is also because we are going into the writer's strike. We're deep into the writer's strike and the actor's strike, and we don't know what's going to happen. And we have been trained by these streaming services to not be hopeful about a new thing. And I know you said the producers, directors, everyone's like, the showrunners are looking into season 3. They have everything mapped out. But like, where's the guarantee? We don't get guarantees anymore. And the fact that we're in the middle of these strikes and like streaming services are telling us that they're losing money, they're not making profits on stuff. Like, where's the guarantee that we're going to get another season?
Yeah, because even though they're picked up, they can still technically get that pulled if things go a certain way, right?
This would be nice. And again, back in the 90s and 80s, where like you could easily get like a third season, like no problem. Like you could easily get like 7 seasons, without any issues. As soon as streaming became a thing, we don't even go past like 3 seasons. Like Netflix has shown you they won't do it. We've been hearing about people where like they have to like change the show like every 3 seasons because then they don't have to pay writers like that much or something. It all goes back to the old TV days and the old TV contracts. And if we were doing the old TV things, like this would be fine. It would be like super exciting and whatever. But with the way that we've been trained now with streaming and stuff, it's just not hopeful. Yeah. Even if we are going to get it, that's fine. Even if 100% we're going to get it, it still just doesn't sit right with me because I don't like it.
Well, when did you realize that this episode was going to be a 2-parter?
I mean, I actually didn't think it was going to happen until the end. Like I thought I kind of didn't expect it to end where it did. I actually thought they were going to like, wrap this thing up really quickly and then like be done with the episode, like war, like even if you were like ended it on like we've just declared war on the not
Gorn?
the Borg, the Gorn, might have been like a interesting cliffhanger, but like I thought like at least Pike would make a decision. We'd see some like 10-15 minutes of like some really intense like action and then like end it. Like I would have preferred like a little bit longer episode and just wrap it up because it's cool that they think they might have like another hour long version of whatever this is, and they might start the next season with a bang. But I actually didn't think that they were gonna, like when we were getting near the end of the episode and it kept going and going, I'm like, okay, so like we got this point, he's gonna make a decision. Now we're not gonna get too much, it's just gonna wrap up and whatever. So I actually wasn't expecting it. And then when they said to be continued, I was like, oh, okay, well that's not what I wanted. So, I noticed that the episode was going long, but I just kept thinking that they were going to wrap things up like they normally do.
Right.
So
when we were driving toward the end, when the landing party gets beamed up, I even commented, I was like, oh, look at the transporter like colors. Because I noticed they look different from what we usually see. My brain did not register that in the moment until the words "to be continued" popped up on the screen. I started to cry. I'm a crier. But then I realized that like I was clued in 10 minutes earlier. The landing party was beamed up by the Gorn. That's why the beams look different, is because they were coming from a non-Starfleet ship. So I was clued in like to the fact that this was going to be probably a little longer than anticipated. And it literally did not occur to me until "to be continued" popped up. So I had no idea it was going to be a part 1.
I love those twists. Don't get me wrong. Like, again, there's a part of me that would have enjoyed this in a different time. I think we're just in such a weird time with streaming and strikes and stuff that it's just, it doesn't sit well. And I'm like, oh, like, yeah, sure, we're going to pay it off later. And I was like, man, I wish we wouldn't do this. I wish we wouldn't risk it all.
Right.
I wish they could have just wrapped it up, and it, if this was lost, we wouldn't have cared, And
I'm looking forward to So my general feelings about the episode were actually made a little higher upon realizing that it was a part one, because my biggest feeling of lack was the fact that on so many previously ons, we're reminded that La'an has like Gorn trauma and that she was on a breeding planet. But then the only time we get to spend with La'an facing a Gorn is like that one that she gets a shot on. And I thought it was surprising that we took a character whose entire identity is condescendent and Gorn trauma survivor, and then we didn't pay any attention to her at all. So the fact that it's going to be a two-parter, I'm anticipating following her more closely, you know, like in the season 3 opener, most likely. This episode worked for me. It felt like a monster episode. It's like you have here's your big bad, and we all have to kind of rally together to figure out how to come together. I love the introduction of Scotty. I love seeing these like original series characters just kind of come in and out. A little gripe I have with that is that this show isn't the original series. The show is Strange New Worlds, and we're supposed to be following like Pike and his crew. And it's very important to me that when Kirk does eventually take over the Enterprise in the original series, that some of the people on the bridge are his own choice. So it's like, we already have Spock, we have Uhura. If Scotty stays, we already have Scotty. So that means that his bridge crew was essentially already chosen for him. And then he was like the adopted captain. Mm-hmm. It's not the end of the world. It's just something that, you know, it's like, oh, are we just going to meet all of these people in Strange New Worlds, which I have a love-hate relationship with. But another thing I like about the finale is I keep talking about how Strange New World is really strengthening the connective tissue between all of the existing series. So if you're a new person and you're just watching, it's fine because you don't really need to know everything that's coming to understand what's happening now. But in the same way that we keep acknowledging Enterprise, which I would argue is the bastard child like of the Star Trek universe, this is like the second time we're acknowledging possibly the 2009 movies of the Kelvin timeline, because the way that we meet Uhura in Strange New Worlds and now the way we meet Montgomery are similar to how they met in the Kelvin timeline. And I just think it's cool that Star Trek is always trying to like be inclusive. It's never a hard no. It's never shitting on anything. It's always just like, let's take all this information that exists in Star Trek lore, marry it together, and reimagine it for like how we would see it in 2023. So I like all the big swings that they're taking. I have some fun like Gorn puppetry information for you a little bit later. I watched the Will Wheaton Ready Room 30-minute thing, which is super fun. So yeah, this episode worked for me. And it worked a little more upon realizing that it was a part one, because like I said, I love La'an as a character and I would like to spend more time with her in Gorn territory. So if that's it for our pre-episode feelings, we'll just kind of dive in. I don't think there's we don't have to beat for beat this whole thing, but essentially we know that Captain Batel and her crew are on this planet. They're a very simple civilization. They wanted to model themselves after the old Wisconsin, U.S., which is very convenient for budgeting because they could just...
Yeah, this feels like a budget thing.
100%.
Like it feels like we just need to set this in like a town. We don't want to like spend it on like a new planet kind of like or whatever, and it needs to be civilized, or it needs to have like a civilization, and where else to like do like have your run of everything, but then to do it in like a small town that already exists.
Right.
So I don't believe any planet, Federation or no, or whatever, utopian or no, would model themselves after like an entire planet wouldn't model themselves after like this kind of thing. It doesn't make any sense. Like even the streets and stuff don't like, there's so many things that you would do in a new future. And it's like, okay, this is a budget thing.
It's a budget thing.
I don't like it. This is interesting if this took place in the timeline of that's an interesting this is an interesting episode. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
as the story of like a Gorn attack or whatever in a small town, this is like a fun kind of like 80s movie kind of way of doing things. And I love that. It doesn't end up being even similar in that tone.
Yeah.
But that is where I could see something like that working. But in Star Trek, this is just boring. I'm like, what? This is where we're gonna set our Gorn attack. You know, it's like even like Midwestern town is one thing, but like if this was Firefly, it would be like on the outskirts of Federation space. Like these towns would still be, like I guess like Western style, you know, because like they don't have the resources or whatever. I was like, so you're telling me you have enough resources to create like this 50s Midwestern style like town, but you don't have the resources to like it's a weird like mix and like, but you're not part of the Federation. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I understand. I like the little line by Patel that's just like, this is why this looks like this. It's almost a nod. It's like, we know the audience is going to pick up on this. We used all of our budget for like real practical Gorn models, zero gravity fight scenes, and like some of the other stuff. So right now, like y'all are going to be cool in the Midwest, Wisconsin, and that's just how it's going to look. But yeah, so they're down there trying to help these people like set up their lives. We see Nurse Chapel's down there before she's ready to get her shit together and go start her internship under her future fiance, Dr. Corby.
And she's given everyone their vaccinations.
And everyone has been vaccinated.
Everyone on the planet.
Every single
this
person.
One person managed to give everyone their vaccinations. This is a huge planet. Is this...
Well, I think it's just the settlement.
I understand it's just a settlement, but like also like the fact that this is such a huge planet and like everything's taking place in this one tiny, so I don't, again, it's weird. Don't like it. But she did it.
But she
gave
did
everyone their vaccinations.
Because she's great. And then she's like, all right, if it's cool with you, I'm going to go
also,
back to the ship.
Midwestern town, this is just not this is just also in our political climate where most people in these Midwestern towns don't even believe in vaccinations.
Oh, we're going to go there.
Well, I'm just saying, like, this is your way to like, you're going to represent, like, why the decision to do that? What was the point? Like, you're giving everyone, the fact that like everyone in this town would want their vaccinations in the fucking first place. And then, I don't know. It's like,
it's utopia,
I'm going to stop
Mattias.
talking about it.
So Nurse Chapel's able to beam back up to, what is it? The Cayuga? And, right as that is happening,
It's America. It's the Midwestern America.
We
I have a
see
problem
chaos happening in the sky.
I know.
And the Gorn, you said you were going to stop talking about it.
I know. No. I know. It was like, I mean, why America? Like, we have so many different cool countries, even in the 50s, with cool buildings. Like, you couldn't Rome at all, like anything. Like, if you're gonna like choose, like, why? Anyway, go ahead.
And that's the hill Mattias is going to die on,
That's
I guess,
what it
for
is.
Star Trek.
It doesn't make any sense.
So we see chaos happening in the sky. We don't actually know what's going on, but we know that trauma is happening. The Cayuga has been attacked and destroyed. There is a blocking beacon, essentially, on the planet, and the Gorn have infested the planet that our Starfleet people are trapped on, as well as the establishing colonists. Naturally, the Enterprise has to get involved. I believe even if there were no Starfleet people on that planet, the Enterprise would have found a way to get involved. But with our star-crossed lovers, Spock and Chapel, we've got Chapel there, we've got Patel there. Obviously, our boys are going to go in guns blazing and try to save these people. However, we have direct orders from upper management in Starfleet that since this planet is technically in unclaimed territory, if we cross this boundary, we're going to start a full-scale war with the Gorn, who, even though we haven't really touched on it all season, it's been in the background of like this percolating dissent between the two entities here. So that's great. What do we do, Mattias? We say, fuck the rules. And Pike decides that he's going to send a landing party down and try to figure out how to fix it from the ground. Ortegas finally gets to go on her away mission, which she seems pretty excited about.
Sure.
She's also the one that figures out that even though Gorn ships are highly intelligent and they have high tech, if we just pretend that we're floating garbage through space, they won't notice us if we land on the planet.
We should talk about the Gorn later, but like the line between like these are like just animals and they're also sophisticated, kind of able to build all these tech things is just really, really weird to me. I don't understand it. I guess that's the point. But we should talk about it later when we actually like encounter some Gorn. I do want to talk about this landing party.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, we get the classic, like, okay, like everyone who we want to join on this thing and do some stuff is joining us. But M'Benga, who, you know, is going down to like kick some ass, doesn't really end up doing any of that. Ortegas, again, does her flying thing, and we're led to believe it's like a really tough thing that like only she can do.
Mm-hmm.
But again, not very convincing of that in terms of like how they represent it. The biggest problem I have with the Ortegas character in this way, she's like, oh, don't worry, I've done this 100 times during the war. And again, this is where I want to talk about what is war to Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
Because at one way, you want to make it traumatic, as war is.
Right.
But also you want to present it as like just a fun, easy, I guess, thing, non-consequential thing that they can do. She's done this 100 times. There's no, first off, what is her position? Is she lieutenant again? Like if she was in the war and she's done like these kinds of landings like over and over again, either one, she is like much higher rank than she should be. And also
she's a lieutenant.
And also why is she so adamant about going on these like landing parties? You've already done this. You've done this a lot. I've met no soldier, no pilot who's like I've done these kinds of maneuvers and these kinds of things 100 times during a war where I'm not deciding like also how old is she supposed to be? Like at this point, like I don't care how long ago the war was.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how are you not either one, retired, or at least higher rank, doing a job that is like, this is the easiest thing there's no pilot that would be like, I've done this. Like if you drag them in and they're like, they're the only ones that could do it, great. But she's like excited about these things and she's been wanting to go on these landing parties and all this kind of stuff. It doesn't make any sense to me. I'm like, what war did y'all do? Like a Nerf war? Did y'all just like shoot Nerf guns at each other? Because it was like, yeah, this was just like a fun, like paintball capture the flag war kind of thing, because it doesn't feel very like significant to the characters or to the Federation or to the Enterprise that war has happened so recently that it is like affecting most of our people, and that this doesn't feel like a war torn.
Well, don't forget that most people on the Enterprise were not a part of the Klingon War. The only people that were immediately affected by that war were M'Benga, Chapel, and Ortegas.
It again, like what? But the Federation was part of a war. Like I'm confused. Like so, not many people have been part of the war. So what? How do you consider it even a war? And if not everyone was, and these people who are higher ranking, who have been in the Federation longer, how did they not touch the Klingon War? But like Ortegas has, you know, like how is this? The things are just not computing in terms of like how war factors into our Star Trek world. Again, no one in the writer's room seems to be interested in any of this. And I'm going to keep harping on it because I am prior military and I'm a veteran and I've been to a war zone. There's like it makes no reason, no sense like why she's not wanting to just stay on the ship if she's done this like so many times. Like,
well,
her character doesn't like strike me as someone who's like actually been to war, and I don't like it. And then they go and they do this landing party, and there's absolutely no Marines. I don't know if Marines exists, but there's no Marine type. Like these are just these officers. There's no grunts. There's no anything. Like part of this party, if you're gonna go and potentially be in the most dangerous situation you've been in, like even bringing some like more red shirts along. There's only like 5 officers and not a single like red shirt inside. This is why we have in our military like Seabees and Marines and grunts, specific people who are frontline type of people. Even SEALs, there's no like SEAL team like this. You know what I'm saying? It's like your job is pilot, your job is medical, your job is captain. Like there's one person whose job it is to like know fighting. And I guess like in this military, everyone is like more well-rounded or whatever. But I feel like there are better ways to represent like this is the opportunity to even bring in like a group of extras that are trained for this kind of thing, even if you're just going to kill them off. You know, even if you're just going to show us like the Gorn like ripping them to shreds or whatever, you know. And sure, our people survive because that's what happened. That's what happened to Chapel, and we're going to get to that later. Like,
yeah,
you don't go like, even if the shuttle can only fit so many people, which I'm sure it could fit more, it can fit a landing party. Even if you're putting together a strike team or whatever, there's absolutely no reason why these people who are not trained for this type of environment. As far as we know, the only person that's been in the war is Ortegas and Mbenga on this ship, right?
And
so none
La'an?
of well, she was a survivor of like Gorn stuff, but
yeah, and
was
she's
she
security
in the war? Is she Warren trained? Like war is different, and again, that's why I keep harping on war is different than just doing security,
right? But she is the head security officer, so like she makes sense that she would be on this, and we know
yes, but she should be leading a team,
and we know that Mbenga has skill because we saw him fight. The person that didn't make sense to me being on this team is Ortegas, and I would like to talk about her a little bit because I'm actually going to reference the book that I'm reading right now with the Red Rising trilogy. If you have a character, I apologize for those of you who aren't going to understand this reference, but Mattias, if you have a character like Darrow, who he's been in the war, and as soon as he was out of the war, he itched to be back in it. And
I do want to talk about
how fucked up he feels about that, and how like, yeah, he does want to be safe and like spend time with his family, but ultimately that pool of like where he feels strongest is in that combat environment. I don't read that in Ortegas, but I would be happy to maybe start seeing that in her if that's where her itch is. She's the best pilot, so that's where she gets placed. But during her piloting, she fought, and that's what makes her come alive. It's not just piloting the ship that makes her happy. It's also piloting the ship through these like, not just on a gallivant through space. It's like through danger, through like, we could die at any moment. And that's what brings her alive. And if there's truth to that statement, we need to see some of that darkness in her character, because even in the musical episode, she's like, I fly the ship and that's what I do. So it's like, how do you take a character like that and then in the war episode and then in this episode try to superimpose this like, yeah, but also I'm a fighter and I want to like be in war. Does that make sense?
Well, because I thought about it, and I'm like, there's 2 types of people who have been in war. There's the people who like continually go back because they know nothing else, and there's the people who like, again, they take it seriously and they're like, if I could do anything to not be in war, I want to be there. Mm-hmm. There's a difference between like, this is not my choice, and there's being there's like really no person that's like this military where they're like, we just got out of a war 2 years ago. I don't know. And then also like, we're ready to do anything to get back into it. Or like, we're not, like, I'm sure, yes, they're like, well, we can't cross a line. And yes, we need to be mindful of what we're doing with the Klingons. And yes, we have to, all that kind of stuff. But none of these people, like, we got one trauma episode and it wasn't very well done. And like, not everyone needs to be traumatized. I get that. A very good movie that we have won an Academy Award for Best Directing that delves a little bit into the subject of like war addiction is The Hurt Locker. And there's a very, very, very good scene near the end of that movie. Spoilers for The Hurt Locker. He is a bomb technician and he's been doing war and like putting himself in these very, very dangerous situations. If you're like, have a person that's like, I've done this 100 times, it's like him, he's had to like diffuse bombs and like the most tense filled things. And then he goes back and he's finishes his deployment and he's like on leave and he's doing regular chores with his wife and he's stuck in a grocery store and he's looking at the massive amounts of choice of cereals that he has been chosen to get by his wife. He's like, go choose a cereal. And he goes and he does it. And he's just like overwhelmed with this choice. And what people who have not been deployed don't understand about the scene is that this is the idea of like, you've just gone from a situation where like every decision you make, every moment of your day could be your last. And now your biggest decision in life is, what cereal am I going to choose? That doesn't compute with a lot of people. Like, it's really, really hard to reintegrate back into normal life when your life is not in danger, like over and over again. And the addiction to war is just is less the addiction for like this like adrenaline and whatever and stuff like that. It's just because like that's the thing that that you've been trained for, and like this, and it doesn't compute to just be like a normal person. It's much easier to be in war because the decisions are much easier in that sense, because there's clear lines that are drawn within your mind or whatever. Like you have like split second things that you have to do and you've been trained for, and it's like it's so much easier to be where your focus is just survive another day, because everything gets distilled down to like, how do you get through this? You don't have all these other random decisions that don't matter. They really don't matter. When something matters, like, you put all your focus on that. That's the addiction that he's dealing with. And you're right. We don't see this kind of idea within Ortega's, but we also don't see a person who like is not wanting to be a part of it, who's not willing to get, like, we're not seeing like a grizzled pilot that's like, oh, we need you just to come back, just to do this. You're the only one that can do it. And we're also not seeing a young upstart who's like never been in war and doesn't understand it. And is like, I want to prove myself and all these kind of things. Like, if you told me that Ortegas was a pilot who didn't get to see combat, who like did like kind of like these regular runs and maybe didn't, really get to experience the kind of like actual war, but like was in and around it, that's fine. But then you go and you tell me like, no, she did these kinds of maneuvers like hundreds of times throughout the war. She's like a war veteran. That doesn't strike me as the same person. Like, I'm not seeing the thing. So yeah, we're talking so much about this.
This is great.
I'm very opinionated about how we represent war and stuff. And it's like Star Trek. I was like, if you're an exploration show and like a fun co-working like let's like get our relationships with people and like, how do we like, this utopian society, like science kind of show, like, that's fine. But if you want to make this like a war-torn show, and a lot of things do this wrong too. I'm only being critical about it because I can, because we're talking about it.
Right.
You know, but that's where I'm like, I have problems with the way that they've been doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you say that. So before we, after this, I'm sure we can move on through the episode, but the idea of Star Trek being, it's always been more about exploration than actual combat. Again, I like that they're taking risks and like trying to swing big and trying to make this show like, yeah, we can do these fun, lighthearted, wholesome things. And we can also talk about what it's like to be Nurse Chapel and just be swamped with like dead body after dead body after dead body and experience that as a young nurse for the first time. So I like the integrity, even if it's like, you're right, it maybe isn't as well thought out or intentional as it could be. But something you mentioned about maybe wanting more of the like connection, we're all in this together instead of fighting, is that Pike 2 or 3 times through this episode mentions like maybe there's more to the Gorn that we're not seeing. Maybe I have a couple quotes written down, but it's things like, maybe instead of finding a way to fight them, we need to find a way to reach them. Maybe it's this, maybe it's that. And I like that Pike, even in these moments of, we worked really hard to kind of dehumanize the Gorn. In a lot of other episodes of Star Trek, but specifically Strange New Worlds, we think about the complexity of, oh, well, even if they're doing something bad, there's goodness to it, or there's misunderstanding, or there's always a way to connect. But with the Gorn, most of the time, we're just like, they're evil, they're predators, they're terrible, and they need to be eradicated, basically. And the fact that Pike is always trying to push back with like, but what if there's something we're missing? What if there's a different way that we can approach this? I think is kind of enticing. And I'll touch on that in a little bit as well. But another thing that I thought was interesting that I actually did not think about until just now is that our landing party, aside from Pike, is what, La'an, M'Benga, and Ortegas. And they are, oh no, we do see M'Benga, but I was gonna say we took our landing party with the people who aren't part of canon, that are like completely new to this show. Battelle as well, Pike's girlfriend. And for a moment, I forgot that M'Benga was part of it though, and he does survive to the original series. Was like, is there a reason that we took this group of people? And the fear was that we were gonna like maybe lose Ortegas, especially if we're going to keep looping in characters from the original series. I was like, oh no, are we going to like lose her to this Gorn battle and then maybe meet like Sulu or something? Yeah. Which I'm hoping is not the case, because also timeline, that doesn't make sense. I know we talked about it. This is a quick aside. It's reminding me of Firefly and Serenity specifically, because we have, spoilers for Serenity, another character who's a very good pilot and like shows, and like he has a thing, and he does die in a similar kind of like maneuver to get through. So it's similar, but like not to get down to a planet, and he does die. Right. Right. And a kind of character who always did want to prove himself, who was not part of the war, and who wanted to prove himself to the 2 people who were in war, including his wife, you know, and the way that he approached things and the way they approached things was very, very different, you know? And again, like, it feels like they want Ortegas to be exactly like Watt. Watt? Yeah. Am I saying Watt? I'm sorry, not Watt. Watt's his character in Wash. Please tell me. I'm thinking of his character in a Knight's Tale. Alan Tudyk. They want him to be like Wash. Yeah. Right? Yes. And that's what they want Ortegas to be, but like it's not that. You know, because she has been in war. So I'm like, which one are you? You know? So there's a very different, again, good show that kind of represented it. I also don't like the way they represent the war in Firefly, the actual war, but you know, there's budget constraints there. You know? Sci-fi wars are just weird
in general.
Yeah.
A lot of the times, you know, but the way they represent like the people who were part of a war and after, you know, and especially the show was supposed to be very similar to like what it was like after the Civil War in America. And so that was very clear, you know, and
Right.
here it's not clear which war, what's our 1-to-1, you know? Anyway, sorry, keep talking about it.
I love that. Keep bringing them up as you think about it. So, basically, we have our landing party.
Yeah.
We need to discover if there's anyone left alive because we're not sure what the situation is on the planet, and we do stumble across, you know, a group of survivors led by Patel. This is where we meet Scotty. This is where we find out that for some reason, the Gorn are not acting the way they usually do. La'an is the first person to point that out, that she sees that they're working cooperatively, that they're not attacking first, asking questions later. They're maybe being a little more curious along with their aggression. And we discover that the big green thing that they dropped onto the planet is in fact the scrambler. So they cannot contact anyone. They can't transport anywhere unless they figure out a way to destroy this beacon. So Pike naturally sets out as the leader. They make their way to the beacon with ideas on how to
But I think
destroy
you're
it.
glossing over Scotty at all. I know you talked about it, but like we haven't like gone ahead.
I mean, we respectfully, like, we just meet him and he comes along for the ride.
I'm curious, like, especially, I know maybe you're saving it for like lore loft stuff, but that was a surprising thing. Never saw it like coming. And like, of course, of like any of the Star Trek characters that we all know is like Scotty, right?
Sure.
And I think like, even though like Scotty is a major character in the original Star Trek, I'd argue that the more famous depiction of Scotty is probably Simon Pegg, which is weird to say because he's only done 3 movies and then the original Scotty's done like how much, you know, episodes, but like it's hard to follow up Simon Pegg. And I want to say that this actor, I think, did a really good job. And as soon as you like hear his accent, I'm like, oh, it's him, you know? And it's like now I had that like Leo DiCaprio moment, like, ooh, you know? And this is where you like are all the time, you know, like always like having this, like, I understand that reference. So I'm like, oh no, This is it. I get it. It's Scotty. And I found myself being like, oh, I really like this guy. You know, he like came in, did his thing, a thing that Scotty would do. Doesn't make sense that he's on this planet. Probably not. Feels a little bit shoehorned in, but also like, I didn't care because like the introduction was really good. The actor was really charismatic and good. And I felt like that this depiction really felt in line with the Scotty that I knew from the Star Trek, the J.J. Abrams Star Treks, and then as well as like the original series. It felt very much in line, and didn't feel like off-putting or whatever. You know, Spock took a little bit getting used to, I think, early on. This Spock, but the Scotty, I didn't feel like took that long to get used to at all. So I really enjoyed the depiction. I thought the introduction was really good, and it was just a really fun. He was probably like one of the better parts of the episode. You know, I almost found myself getting emotional. I was like, oh, like a character I recognize or whatever. I don't know if that's a failing on Strange New Worlds to not have characters that like I would love as much as like Scotty comes along and does his thing. Again, we talked about it with like the Lower Decks crossover, whereas like these characters, comedic and kind of like very real, grounded characters. Comedic to me is like, it's weird that being comedic relief is more grounded, but I feel like that Scotty felt more grounded in the same way that his Lower Decks characters were, and is a breath of fresh air to like this dynamic that we usually have with the Strange New Worlds cast, you know?
Yeah. Part of me wonders if it's because like with the Lower Decks crossover, not only obviously do those two actors have a great handle on the characters they play in Lower Decks, but we only got them for one episode. So they're not as like constricted to like story arcs or vibes or episodic adventures. Like we literally just get them for their moment to shine and then we don't visit them again. Whereas with our other characters, like we do spend more time with, and therefore they're more likely to run into like failings and judgments in ways that those like one-off characters aren't. Also, like Mattias, yes, you're falling into the perfect trap of this is the character that you are like most familiar with and like excited about, because I will say like Simon Pegg did a banger job as Scotty in the Kelvin timeline. So of course, like people ingratiate to him immediately. And so when you see him here with that same energy, it's like, oh, I know this. It's something so easy to latch onto. I don't think it's necessarily a hit against some of the other characters that we get to spend time with. I just feel that, again, when you get special time with one character, of course they're going to seem really cool, but like I love La'an during her episodes, and I love Pike even when he's just like cooking for Spock. So
it's the same criticism we have whenever Kirk comes along, and we're just like, well, we haven't had as long with these newer characters that we've gotten to have with the originals. Like we don't need them so often, right?
Yeah.
And again, also there's a reason why Scotty was such a good character before that people loved, and there's a reason why he works so well. And again, I think it's because like he feels like a real well-rounded character, and we haven't really had the chance to have that well-roundedness with the other characters. And so again, like it's just easier to kind of like latch on to him.
Yeah. But this is the first time an actual Scotsman has played Scotty.
I was wondering. I was actually curious about that.
Yeah, so he's a true Scotsman. I have the actor's name written down somewhere. I will say it probably later when I talk more about Scotty.
Now, it always did annoy me that Scotty and Scottish, like that's how they named him. I was like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I was like, oh, okay, that's on the nose. A Scotsman named Scotty. Like, can we... but that's how it was, I guess, the shorthand of early writing,
I suppose. His last name being Scott as a Scotsman, you're just like, oh, okay. His first name is Montgomery. What was I saying? Oh yeah, so this is the first time that an actual Scotsman is portraying Scotty. This is also the earliest we've seen Scotty as a character in like prime timeline. So this is our first meeting of him, and in his 51 years of service that he will eventually have, he serves on 11 different ships. So I'm interested to hear
before he gets to the Enterprise.
No, just generally, that's still like a ton of ships to serve on. 11 is like a high number. So I'm interested to see where this is, because we already know that he's on the Stardiver. There's a ship before that, definitely. And I'm just wondering, like, where, as we learn more about him, like, where in his career does
he's
this
also
fall?
a lieutenant.
Yes.
Again, if we're going by Navy rules, like ensign, like lieutenant is barely above like ensign. Like lieutenant is probably. Oh man, I'm gonna fudge this. I'm gonna say like 4 years. Like lieutenant's not very long in terms of like service. And I know maybe people in Star Trek serve longer, but like lieutenant's like early on in the ranking system, so it feels like there's a lot more. Again, I feel like a lot of these characters, when we say like, oh, you're a lieutenant, but also you've been in war, that doesn't feel like you've been in for very long, and we meet so many lieutenants. I don't know what the ranking system is in Star Trek, and it doesn't feel like it's the same.
So I've got the his like Wikipedia page essentially pulled up, and it looks like right now when we meet him, he's a lieutenant junior grade. Don't know what that means because I'm not in the military.
It's a rank before lieutenant.
Okay, so he's like baby. This is like the beginning of his career.
Again, he would be ensign if it goes by the same ranking. I don't know. It's like ensign. I get first lieutenant and then lieutenant confused, and like what they're saying is like sometimes first lieutenant is like lieutenant during new grade is what you're saying, and then it's lieutenant. So like if he's like 2 or 3 years in.
Okay. Here we go.
Yeah.
I'm just lore lofting all over the place. I apologize, but I think you'll find this very interesting. So the lowest rank, and I can give you
has to be ensign.
The lowest ranks are crewman, third, second, or first class.
That's different because we're talking about officers, and again, we're separating when we're in the military. We usually separate enlisted from officers, right? And officers start at ensign. So when I started as enlisted, I was a seaman or an airman, right?
So this one's cadet.
For enlisted or for officers?
Enlisted, you start as a cadet,
right?
And you can earn your 3 stripes as a cadet, and then the ladder is enlisted officer ranks after being cadet. Crewman, third, second, or first class. Then you move up to junior officer ranks, which is ensign or lieutenant. Then your senior officer rank of commander or captain, and then your flag officer rank of commodore, rear admiral, or vice admiral.
So here's the thing: is like the reason why I'm having trouble figuring it out is because in the regular military, you separate officers and you separate enlisted, which means that like whereas enlisted start at like E1, officers start at O1, right? And you don't go from E1 into like O1. You don't go like up through the E's, like E1 through 2 through 10, or 11, which is I think as high as it goes, right? Mm-hmm. And then you start back at O1, right? That's 2 separate things. Mm-hmm. You can have like a E9 person who like an officer is technically above them because of their training and stuff and where they are at officer grade, but like a enlisted person has been in longer and is technically a higher rank in, so to speak, than an officer is, right? Mm-hmm. So whereas like when we keep talking about like ensigns or whatever, like that's beginning of career, like as opposed to like an E1 airman or whatever cadet is also at beginning of career, and they could be like parallel, like climbing through the ranks. It's not like a cadet turns into an officer. That's not how it goes. They don't cross pollinate. Those are 2 separate things. So in Star Trek, are you leading me to believe that like everyone starts out as a cadet and then goes through like the enlisted rankings and then goes through the officer rankings?
Well, here's the annoying thing is that it changes from the original series into Next Generation. So let me tell you this, and I want you to tell me if this makes more sense. There are enlisted officer ranks: able seaman, petty officer, second class, petty officer, first class, chief petty officer, senior chief petty officer.
Those are all enlisted typically.
Period. Yeah. Yes. Then
officer, because I don't want you to confuse. I was a petty officer. Mm-hmm. Petty officer does not mean officer. That's a different thing. And chief, petty officer, or whatever. Those are still enlisted rankings.
That's what this says. Yeah, enlisted ranks. Then in a separate tier that are not connected, there's a junior officer rank, which leads you to either be an ensign, a junior grade lieutenant, or a lieutenant. And that's that section.
But they're separate. They don't cross.
Right. So I think you can start as an ensign or as an able seaman, and like where you grow through the ranks from there is dependent.
That's what I'm saying is like we don't have these like enlisted crewmen, things like that, which is like officers are typically trained. They go through like college. You have to have like a college degree before you become an officer. So you've already done like 4 years of like kind of service before you're even like in service, right? And the reason why people don't trust officers in wartime is because they've never actually been to war. They've only played war. Whereas like when you start off and like enlisted, you could be going to war like immediately, you know?
Right.
And even though officers outrank because of their training, a lot of times like your sergeants or whatever have actually already had this, while you were 4 years doing college, we've done 4 years of actual war. You know, it's like it's a very different thing. This is why it bothers me so much. But also, your what was I going to say? So like, there's no like officers usually are trained to like be in charge of like platoons, things like that, squads, whatever you may want to call it or what it may be. And and this landing party is just made up of officers.
Right.
There's no enlisted. It's like all officers. Like there's not even like Mbenga couldn't bring like a junior medical a cadet, you know, to like help out.
Right. We didn't bring
things.
any red shirts.
The pilot has to ask to like, do you need any help? Great in certain shows whenever it's like these are main characters. It's weird that Star Trek likes to do this over and over again. And I'm like, we have a new show where we could be doing something differently. And you could like round out the world, I guess, per se, the world building of it. And they still stick to these weird old style of like, no, it's always like these officers. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So again, don't join the military. Every military movie or show will be ruined for you. That's just because of stupid things like this. So I don't know I don't remember how we got onto the subject or how we want to move on. But we were talking about Scott.
We were talking about
Scott and like
Scotty.
what rank he is. Again, very early on in his career.
Yes.
And so who knows what's going to happen to him or if he's going to stay. I have a feeling based on the way that they've treated Kirk and based on the way they've treated Spock and Uhura, that he's going to be part of the crew.
Yeah.
I don't think he's going anywhere. There's no reason to introduce him and then like have him like keep going back and forth.
Especially because he's the chief engineer of the Enterprise. So
eventually,
when the original series starts.
Yeah.
So I feel like since Pelia is our chief engineer right now and she knows him from Starfleet, I feel like maybe bringing him in under her and spending random bits of time with them, the same way we sometimes see Kirk, is probably going to be the way they tie it all together. Because yes, he has to like fall in love with the Enterprise. The Enterprise becomes his ship. So I think that's interesting. So yes, let's with Scotty and Batel and Pike, that's when they go to the beacon. That's when they run into the Gorn. The Gorn does not attack because Batel specifically places herself in between the Gorn and the other two. And we find out that she's
pregnant.
Infused with Gorn BBs.
You can just say she's pregnant, Shannon.
She's pregnant.
Congratulations, Batel.
Stop.
Pike, I'm sorry, you're not the father.
Pike, you are not the father. So we find out that that's pretty fucked up. And Pike, in true Pike fashion, is like, there has to be a way to fix this, and I'm going to think about it. And then we cut back to the Enterprise, and we have our crew figuring out the same thing that our ground crew just figured out, that this beacon needs to be destroyed, and that's the way we save our people from the planet.
Yeah.
And to do that, we're going to use the hull of the Cayuga to crash into the planet, into the beacon, to destroy it. And Spock's like, I'm the man for that job because I can put on a spacesuit and fly through space without a spaceship.
Again, there's definitely other aliens on the ship. I said this during the episode. Spock doesn't need to be the only one, but sure, I guess in this context, we need
it has to be Spock so we can see that on the tattered bridge of, or wherever she ended up being, sickbay or whatever, that Nurse Chapel has somehow miraculously survived. And Mattias, I want to bring something to your attention.
You know what I'm going to say. Go ahead.
We see
Sure.
Nurse Chapel is the only survivor of this Gorn attack. We see that Scotty is the only survivor of his attack.
Well,
he said he's the only one that survived from his ship.
I mean, he's the only one that was able to get away on a shuttle. So,
and then La'an is the only person that survived on her breeding planet. And I'm wondering if there's this weird in the first season, La'an mentions that there's no one ever left. And that's why Starfleet has never made first contact, is because by the time the Gorn are done with you, everyone is dead. But we get these one-off people that, like, just one person keeps getting away. And if you do it once, it seems like a plot device. Like, of course, Nurse Chapel has to survive. Of course, Scotty has to survive. Of course, La'an is supposed to survive. But now is it kind of a trend that like we just get like one person that seems to be able to like come out of these weird Gorn situations. Kirk comes out of his Gorn battle in TOS like unscathed as well. So I'm just wondering if there is any like intent or purpose behind that, or if we're just like, oh, they're so scary they can kill everyone but this one person who just lucky enough, smart enough, happenstantially enough to get out of their predicament.
Is that your question?
Kinda. That's my thought. You know,
I would have to say that there's no
This is so hot.
intent. You mean, is there intent from the Gorn to do that?
Yeah.
To leave one person alive? I think that would make sense if it didn't feel like how would they know that like one person survived the attack on the ship? Well, first off, like what is the one person, right? Like their attack involved a ship and then a planet. And then, so Scotty survived. Is this all part of like one attack? You know, and therefore 3 persons survived, more persons survived than just one.
Right.
And so like, or these like 3 separate attacks where, you know, one person survived. It doesn't seem like there's any intention there from the Gorn per se. Like that would be like way too, again, that for them to understand that like one person survived the saucer attack, what the Cayuga, that ship, and then no one else, which already to me is like stupid, but and it happens to be a person that's not part of the Cayuga, it's part of the Enterprise, so sure, main character syndrome, I guess, but
I want that.
There's absolutely no reason to believe that it's a Gorn tactic.
Okay, yeah.
I just can't imagine. I
agree.
They can always retcon that and say like, yes, that was intentional. If that's what you want to do, but
there's no way they would know.
Like, how would they? And again, why Chapel versus Scotty? Scotty already survived. Like he was the one person then.
Scotty's from a different attack, but yeah.
But it was on their way to attack this planet, right? And so again, if Chapel, why not? Batel? What?
If Chapel, why not Scotty? Batel with a B.
Why not her? You know, she's already surviving because she's been bred. You know, like why Chapel? You know what I'm saying? Like that's part of the same attack.
Ew.
You know, if Scotty's, you know what I'm saying? So like why? Like they wouldn't. That doesn't make any sense.
Well, Batel's got to die, in my opinion. Regardless, it's just an interesting thing that even just over the course of this episode, we see like 3 sole survivors of different things. But yeah, so Spock choo-choos his way through the debris and the rubble to attach retro pulse engines. They call them retro something, I forget. But essentially, they're going to move the hull of the ship so it crashes at the right trajectory to fuck up this beacon.
Honestly, I have no problem with this. This is fun.
So he places the thrusters appropriately, and he happens to get inside the ship when we see our grown Gorn for the first time. Chapel and Spock's eyes meet, and then we get a zero gravity battle scene between our 2 Enterprise crew members and this large 6 foot 7.5 Gorn.
Again, no problem with this. To a certain extent. I just feel like there's a lot of coincidences happening to get to this point.
Correct.
But like, it's fun. The idea is fun. The idea of what he's like, Spock is doing is fun. The fact that he passes by the exact window, that's stupid. Whatever, right? That the Gorn also travels just as fast, but manages to be like secretive as, you know, as Nurse Chapel. I thought it was like 2 separate Gorns, you know, like that weird coincidence, like that the one Gorn here, like somehow managed to beat her as well as like sneakily, like sneak up on Spock. I don't get it, right? The fun anti-gravity thing I thought was like super cool.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a little awkward, I guess. It's hard to do.
Yeah, because you got 4 people on or 3 people on wires.
Here's the thing: is I really did like seeing a Gorn in a mask. I really like seeing this oxygen thing. I liked seeing this adult Gorn. Felt like a little bit more intelligent and stuff. I was like, oh, this is what I would expect them to be, you know? Because there's absolutely no version of the Gorns that we've seen so far that have built this massive ship or built this massive beacon.
Right.
There's absolutely no version of that I've seen. But then this one shows up. I'm like, okay, a little bit more what I would expect. He's wearing a mask. He, she, I don't know. They're genderless. Super cool. I wish we had seen more of that to make it make sense to me that they even built this thing in the first place, because again, sci-fi does this a lot. Like, you know, Starship Troopers is a little bit like kind of like delves into this, like, and even I'm thinking not World of Warcraft, StarCraft, right? There's this like whole alien race that's very similar to like Gorn and every other kind of like alien race that you've seen before, like kind of insect-like or whatever, or very much like the Gorn, reptilian, like whatever. And they're like mostly animals, but then they have like increasingly intelligent like types of creatures, you know, as they like grow or whatever. But there's like one queen that whatever. You have to make it make sense that they have this technology, that they're actually like a threat and not just like who.
Well, do you
like,
not remember seeing the Gorn in season 1?
It's just more of the fact that like, how do you build a ship? Like, I'm more questioning sci-fi logic rather than like Gorn logic, because like sci-fi logic says like, oh yeah, there's an alien species that has been able to do this, but like they seem animalistic. They don't seem like very intelligent in that sense. Like we're having trouble as humans nowadays figuring out interstellar travel. You can say it's due to budget. You can say it's due to like so many different factors. Maybe eventually we'll get there, right? But like it was already hard enough for humans to interact with Vulcans. You know, like Vulcans gave us the technology. How does this other race that?
Well, Vulcans didn't give us the technology,
didn't they?
No.
Didn't they help us to join?
Chat,
please help me out here.
No, the rule is that you have to discover like warp capabilities, which is why Zephyr Cochrane is so important from Star Trek Enterprise. You can't make first contact until a civilization is considered warp capable.
How? Okay, yeah, I understand. We've seen like some primitive civilizations out there who haven't discovered warp technology, and I'm confused on how this Gorn, which is based on primitive animal instincts, has discovered warp technology. Mm-hmm. Like, it doesn't make sense. But then we see this Gorn in a mask, and then we see like a little bit of intelligence. Like, I want to see more of them.
Yeah.
I want to see more of these like fighters, people, builders, whatever. Like, there's some sort of intelligence there, because like, again, I know this is weird and nerdy for me, but you think about the fact that like this massive ship that just came out of orbit, destroyed one other ship, attacking another planet, very dangerous group of species, a very dangerous species. But you have to imagine, like, in order to even get to that point, like, you have to, quote unquote, hire, commission builders, someone whose only job is like to build, and like scientists to like put together, and it doesn't like, and then you only like put on this ship animalistic, hive-minded kind of creatures. That doesn't make any sense. No, you have to tell me that there's builders that exist, there's scientists that exist, there's a whole community of union workers probably out there that are just fighting for a living wage, trying to like figure out like how are they gonna like just take care of their family. that built this ship is what I'm thinking. You know, this wasn't like barfed up by like the queen. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Like I need to see more of this, like more civilized. And you have to imagine that if these are such a threat to the rest of the Federation, that other people are aware of this. It's not just Pike. Pike is not the only one that's been like, oh, maybe there are more to them than we thought. I was like, no, they have to be. They have a whole ship.
Right.
There's definitely more to them than you thought.
We just haven't, you're right. Like we haven't gotten to explore that yet. And something I want to bring up is that when Kirk meets a Gorn for the first time, like 6 years-ish after this happens,
they speak English, don't they?
When they fight, even though Kirk wins, Kirk spares the Gorn's life and they establish first contact with the Gorn and the Federation, like officially. So far to the point that in Lower Decks, I think I mentioned this in passing, like there are Gorn characters in Lower Deck. Like they work at the food stand. There's a Gorn shop that you can go and visit and like talk to the guys. So they are, even though they are animalistic, and right now all we know of them is they're like animal hunters almost, the more predator part of them, the part of them that breed. We don't know anything else about the rest of their culture. So you're 100% right. There is so much more, like Pike is hinting at, that we know, because if they are capable of warp drive and understanding the concept of like enslavement and breeding and treaty lines, right? Like I couldn't tell Ariel to not cross my treaty line. Ariel wouldn't give a shit. She goes where she wants. She's an animal. And she's in control of our household.
Ariel's our cat, by the way. You've seen her, you know her, you love her.
You've seen her around. She's mean mugging me right now from her perch. But you know what I mean? So for them to understand these broader concepts, even though they are reptilian, they're also humanoid. And there's more to them than meets the eye. And that's why I'm hoping that in season 3, in the first episode, we're going to see more to them than just what we've seen already, which is these like battle monsters, essentially, because there has to be more behind that for them to be as capable and as dangerous as they are.
Yeah, so this is a cool Gorn to see, because I felt a little bit like there's an alien aspect to it, Alien being the movie, not just Alien
100%.
like the concept, you know, like with the tail and everything. And that was kind of cool, but also like, again, he's wearing a mask. He's trying to put in a code. Like there was like an interesting, like he knew what was happening and he was using his tail to like an advantage. It was more, it was less animalistic and it was more like a soldier kind of would be. And I really like that, you know?
Yeah.
And there's weird things that, again, I have a few problems. Like, I guess like, I'm going to say something and then I contradict myself. Like, you know, Chapel uses a phaser that is not one of the phasers from the crate, you know, that can hurt the Gorn, but manages to help save Spock. But I guess it's Spock who manages to like pierce the mask, the oxygen mask. Where's the oxygen tank, by the way?
Chapel does grab Spock's gun. The gun that she reaches for was knocked out of Spock's hand.
There's nothing to say that Spock's gun was from that crate, was it? Because everyone in that crate all the guns went to the landing party. They were like rifles, not like the phaser that's like at his side. I don't know.
Regardless.
Maybe it could be like whatever. Just doesn't.
You're
It's
right,
like
though.
you establish one thing and then you don't
necessarily
pay it
follow.
all.
Yeah.
Doesn't make any sense. We don't use that grenade too, which bothers the hell out of me. I was like, we introduced this nitrogen grenade, and I thought we were going to use it. Like when Scotty and Patel and Kirk Pike were on their little mission, but didn't end up doing it. So.
Well, it might pay off in season 3 because that's, oh my gosh, Madigan. That's how Hemmer like saved everyone and essentially killed himself, is that he like jumped into the nitrogen, right? And froze himself so the eggs wouldn't hatch. So that's like a callback to how we've already...
he jumped off the ship. He like just went out into the open. I don't recall a grenade being involved, but like he just like...
No, but the idea that like you have to freeze the eggs so they can't hatch. Like he couldn't
Sure.
just die or blow up. Like it had to be
Yeah.
a specific type of.
Do you think like Patel's gonna do that or something? Also, like, how is she the only one that's been bred of all those survivors? Like, how did she get caught? No one else got caught or survived. Like, what? Like, she's with all these survivors, but like, no one else is part of it. You know what I'm saying?
We don't know because you would argue they don't. I don't know. I don't think she told anyone that she was attacked and bred, which leads me to believe that there's no reason that couldn't have happened to other people too.
Well, immediately, as soon as like, again, this is weird logic. Like, as soon as you tell me you're quote unquote infected and you're part of this survive group and you've been with them for hours, I'm like, okay, great. So who else? You know,
right?
We need to check everyone. Like, hey, go to Mbanga. We need to like.
Correct.
This one person has been bred. We need to double check everyone else.
Yeah.
You know? But again, that's my logic. I guess I don't.
Yeah.
Not really.
No, I definitely think it makes sense. But Pike, in very Kirk fashion, like he likes his choices and he doesn't believe in no-win scenarios. So even if every person in that room has been like
that's
infected,
fine,
he would be like, fuck it, we're gonna get it back to the ship, we're gonna figure it out later once
that's
we're all
fine,
safe.
but they don't quarantine or mention it or even, you know what I'm saying? Like they don't like start to figure this out.
Right.
Granted,
the focus is just Patel.
He didn't find out until like later. I think it's more of a problem of Patel, not because clearly she's not the only one. If there's other survivors and she survived for a reason, the reason being that she was already bred. It's a weird word to say, to use as a verb, but like if she has survived for that reason, then the other survivors, there's a higher chance that they are also have survived because of that same reason.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that like she doesn't piece that together, like even if you don't want to tell your boyfriend, like the other people should know.
Absolutely.
Like the other people would already know and they would have given it up, you know? Like I feel like at any point, like any one of them would have said like, I need help, you know? Like,
right.
It doesn't, it's a logic thing and you know, for the writing, it's fine. I get it. For the, like the tension of it, you know, the storytelling of it. Like I get it, but it's really weird.
Yeah. But you know, Starfleet is just unstoppable. So Nurse Chapel and Spock are able to defeat their Gorn adversary. We're able to knock down that beacon. And unfortunately, right at the wrong nick of time, the ground team is beamed up, we find, by the Gorn ship, not by the Enterprise. So we have a dilemma here that some of our people made it safely to the Enterprise.
They have warp technology.
Mm-hmm.
They have beaming technology.
Mm-hmm.
They have communication blocking technology.
Mm-hmm.
Someone needs to explain to me how they have not paid attention to the Gorn until now.
Well, Mattias, respectfully, space is huge, and it's possible, like, so much of Star Trek takes place in the Alpha Quadrant. Space is huge. Like, perhaps these aliens have come from neighboring quadrants that we are only aware of them as they enter our space, because in Starfleet timeline 2, we haven't expanded very far yet either. We've only explored like a very small section of our part of the quadrant. So I think it makes sense to me that as we learn about the Gorn, we are seeing them for the threat that they are. This is only the second time that Pike has come across one, even though La'an has been on a breeding planet. Like, she comes from a different section of space as well.
I hear you.
I'm sweating.
I hear you, but then there's a crate on every single ship that is standard now that every captain knows about in order to fight the Gorn if they encounter them.
That's weird. That was weird.
That is like that. to me tells me that they should know more about the Gorn than they actually know. That this is not just some rant. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Like this is.
And no, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
I hated when that was my least favorite part of this entire episode, was when they pulled that, like, here's the answer. We can just shoot them with this now because we are all equipped with this thing. I'm like, okay, that can't be true. And that can't hold weight because in season 1, which was maybe at most a year before this, you didn't have weapons to fight the Gorn. So how did we equip all of Starfleet ships with these weapons, develop that technology? We didn't steal Gorn bodies. We didn't research them. How would we have that information? Mm-hmm. That is a Starfleet loophole, in my opinion. That's like an open space. It's just like, here you go. You have weapons now. Like, don't think about it too hard. But La'an in passing saying, like, no contact has ever been made because the Gorn never leave anyone alive. But apparently the Enterprise and our little crew of people is always able to get away from them. I'm like, no, because I do like the Gorn as this simultaneously animalistic, dangerous predator that also has this like high intelligence. And if you were ever able to, dead or alive, have a Gorn and study it to find out, like, how do they react to our phasers? How are they already stronger than us, smarter than us? How do we combat that? You're telling me that happened in like a year? And then you equipped every single vessel? What about the vessels that were on a 5-year mission in the opposite direction? How did you get crates to those like outposts? So no, that doesn't make sense to me. Star Trek, what are you doing?
Yeah, it's weird because again, like, it doesn't seem like the writers or showrunners do research in terms of like anything that they want to explore or do, and like it's because it's part of Star Trek lore, they just have to make it so to speak, right? But like, I'm editing a reality show right now, and one of the segments is about a taxidermist, and we're talking about like starlings, European starlings who have become pests, right? And like, this is an animal, and I'm just thinking about the fact that like, if the Gorn are quote unquote very similar to these European starlings, like, how did they get here? How did they travel, right? Well, as with most pests who came from Europe to America, most animals, they were brought over by accident or on purpose by humans, you know? And so like, you would have to assume that like, if you're going to do like a one-to-one comparison, or even like a very similar, like, oh, how did the Gorn like travel around if they're not intelligent enough to build their ships or whatever, if they're just animalistic monsters or whatever, then it would have to have been done by like humans or another species who is trying to trade them or hunt them or do whatever, you know, or breed them, you know, and then it became like overwhelming, and then they became like pests within these certain planets, you know, or within these certain sectors, and then you couldn't get rid of them because they were so small or whatever that they could hide in like mice and ducks or whatever. And like, if you didn't know before, it would become an infestation. There's certain things where I feel like this could be believable, but they haven't done the research and they haven't like tried to think about that, you know? And because the Gorn have been established to be like semi-intelligent, you know, like it's hard to represent them as both. And I don't mind representing the intelligence of them, but then also representing them as these monster, animalistic, like whatever. And then we haven't encountered them. Like all the things that you just said, it just doesn't feel weird. It's like we spent so much time on the Klingons this season, and that never paid off to any extent, and then paid no mind to like Gorn stuff, and it feels like we should have been spending time with that, you know. And or this should be a Klingon attack.
Well, yeah,
it doesn't. You know what I'm saying?
What I mean.
Like,
we did spend so much time on the Klingon War. I kept reminding you during our conversations. It's like we keep talking about the Gorn, but like in passing. But we keep trying to lead up to the Gorn being like the bigger bads of like Star Trek Strange New Worlds. And yeah, we're only spending one episode per season with them. But we're putting so much weight on the trauma that they've left on their victims. So I kind of agree with that. I was doing a little bit of digging into the Gorn hegemony. There it is. That word does not make sense to my brain. Looking at it the way it's spelled, my brain sucks. Anyway,
what does it mean, Shannon?
Hold on. So the Gorn hegemony were re-mentioned in Star Trek Enterprise, which means that as early as Jonathan Archer, we had some sort of intelligence about the Gorn. So now I have to agree with you. You're correct. These are not an absolute brand new species that we're just running across if we've already been like intercutting with them through Starfleet's time and space. Because if Jonathan Archer, again, one of the first missions of Starfleet, came across a Gorn, then there's no reason that there wouldn't be some information there. It's not touched on in depth, in detail. It looks like it's a little more in passing, but again, I think, this is the first time we're exploring it, so I am excited to flesh them out, and I am anxious to flesh them out. Like, I want more of that information so more of it makes sense. Speaking of Gorn, though, I told you guys I watched that Ready Room bit with Will Wheaton, and the whole segment is on how they built the Gorn practically, and the small Gorns in the close-up are all puppets. So they're either manned with the 3 different people, one on each leg, one on the head, the little guys. And then there's a hand puppet that you could attach legs to depending upon how much of a close-up it was. And then the big boy, the big boss that we fight, is a 6 foot 7.5 man in a Gorn suit that weighs 110 pounds. And they said that stunt guy is just the baddest bitch, because wire work is already pretty strenuous on the body, but then to have that extra 110 pounds on your huge frame and that just makes, for me, that work is so cool. That fight scene is even cooler knowing that a man had to move 100 pounds of this ferocious material, and I'm sure they tried to make it as comfortable as possible. I have to say
that's probably why it worked for me, is because all the close-ups of the baby Gorns, felt menacing and stuff, and the weight of the adult Gorn felt real, even with there's clear CGI elements to it, but there was something about it that really, really worked and felt it was interacting with everything else. And I was man, I want to see more of this. If this was the entire episode, that would have been really cool. To me, it's it did really work for me. I have to shout out the use of practical effects. I'm sure it wasn't easy. And I know it's not easy to do this nowadays. And probably would have been easier to do CGI, and I'm sure there were CGI enhancements that still helped it out.
Yeah. But eyelids, they were showing the panel, and each eyelid moves independently, not only horizontally, but there are lateral movements too. And each knob is hand controlled by the guy. So you've got one person puppeting the mouth and the neck animation, and then you have one guy on the board controlling all of the flicks of the eyes and the tongue and stuff. It was interesting. They were also saying that the puppet, they tried to stay in character. So the puppeteers and the animatronics guy would stay. So if they were taking notes, the Gorn would be the one receiving the note, and they would try to stay as in the scene as possible. So the actors would also get more comfortable reading the Gorn as real or as a threat. Which is cute, because we get a bunch of, if anyone wants to watch it, you get a bunch of shots of the actress that plays La'an, sitting on this table, trying to pet the Gorn and play with its little hands, and it's gnashing its teeth at her. And then they say rolling, and we're getting ready to act, and she changes, and the creature changes its position. That was probably such a cool collaborative effort between all the puppeteers to make that an honest experience. I apologize for cutting you off, but that's so cool.
Well, we'll try and link the video then in the show notes and stuff.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like people would love to see that. And the thing that bothers me is that I actually didn't know. I didn't notice that it was puppeteering. It never crossed my mind. I guess I always assumed it was CGI. There's definitely CGI versions of them in the episode. And I wish I'd known more that it was like puppeteering and stuff. And the fact that it worked so well with like, and I was like, oh man, the CGI is like so good. Like it didn't cross my mind. It's like, it's so easy to just be like, yeah, that was like super cool, but like not understand the work that went behind it. And like to also like kind of brush it off as like CGI or whatever, or things like that. And I'm like, man, this is so much more involved than I thought it was. And I hate that it just kind of passes by so quickly and that you don't really notice it. You know, I almost want to notice it more because like I know that VFX and VFX and visual, there's two different special effects. I'm sorry. VFX and special effects are two things that you don't want to notice. Like if it's good, you don't notice it. But I almost wish I'd noticed it more. Yeah. Because I don't want to brush things off.
So you can appreciate it.
You know? Yeah. So that's it. It is really cool. We'll link that stuff to the show notes.
Heck yeah.
Well, I think again, there's a cliffhanger. They don't resolve anything. Everyone's kind of, our main people are with, a lot of our people are with the Gorn, the survivors, and then Scotty ends up on the ship and he goes off with our new engineer who had nothing to do all season, but whatever. And Pike is stuck with a decision that he doesn't make because we cut to a to be continued screen. We've talked about that. I'm curious now, not necessarily to wrap up the episode, but more so to wrap up the season, like how you feel about season 2 of Strange New Worlds, and if this kind of worked for you as a whole, how this kind of wrapped everything up in general.
Yeah, I am hard on things that I love because I expect them to be excellent. So I've been critical of this season of Star Trek because I do feel that at its best, Star Trek ends up being deep. You look back on, I would argue you don't look at seasons of Star Trek, you look at the whole series. And the whole series as an entire puzzle makes you feel a certain way. And I have to remember that right now I'm in the middle of the storytelling. I'm just putting pieces together. So I want to offer a little more patience and grace to Strange New Worlds as it continues to, again, take big swings, try new things, try to tie together lore while staying true to welcoming new people. So I love Star Trek so much, and it is such a joy. Why am I going to cry? It is such a joy to spend time in a world where, again, I really do feel that it's so idealistic. Like you always want the best. You always want to try to communicate. You always want to try to do the right thing, be the good friend, like be the strong commander. And spending an hour in that universe every week is a delight, even when the episodes aren't as deep or as thoughtful or as fluid as I would like them to be, even if they don't depict war as aggressively as I would like, even if all the musical numbers weren't necessarily hits. Like, there's still something so special and magical about Starfleet and like being on the Enterprise that I'm really going to miss being in. So of course the season works for me because I love Star Trek. I am a Trekkie at heart, and you really have to fuck something up for me to not find something to like about it. So as a whole, I enjoyed the season. I would argue not as much as season 1, but I would also argue because season 1 was so new and was the like dip back into what rebooting Star Trek felt like, that I'm willing to take this season for what it is. And I'm so excited to move forward as we spend more and more time with these characters authentically and after the writer's strike. So Star Trek, I love you. What do you think, Mattias?
I think that like I still enjoy Strange New Worlds. I don't think that this season hits the I guess highs or the emotional impact that the first season did. There's a lot of things where I'm like, oh, it started doing the things that I thought this show was going to be and the things that I don't like about shows kind of like this. More and more, we talked about it before, more and more I wish this was like a 22 episode or 24 episode kind of season. I feel like this kind of show like wants to be that, but then also tries to be, as we see, like this 10 episode, like very streamlined, tight writing kind of show. And it ends up not being that, and it does it for like a few episodes, but then like there's other elements that just don't land for me in between, where I'm like, why are we like all these sidetracking and all this like side quests and whatever you may call it, that feel very inconsequential to the main plot line. And then the episodes that are supposed to be consequential to the main plot line, I'm like, oh, so this is the main plot line that we're doing? Like, I'm really confused. We dealt with so many different things. We were hard on Ted Lasso the previous season or the latest season for introducing elements that halfway through the season, like, didn't pay off. And I'm hard pressed to like understand how anything in the first half of this season paid off near the end. Right. Mm-hmm. Like, there's no reason. I know, like, again, our start of the show involved Pike, Anson Mount being on paternal leave. But like anything in episode 1 has no bearing on this final episode. Character wise, mentally, or even just plot wise in terms of like what actually happened, and it goes on and on like that, so it's frustrating. But then there's like an element to everything that the show does, everything that the showrunners try to do, everything that we just talked about with like how much effort they put into like the musical episode and the puppetry of this kind of thing and like the swings that they make. And I'm like, this is such an earnest show, and all the actors love being a part of it, and all the showrunners love being a part of it, and everyone's like really trying their hardest to like do something new. Is it making itself a part of the canon in the way that like the original series or Enterprise or the Next Generation or Voyager is making it part of thing? I don't know. The second season, I think, has failed to do that. I think the second season should have done that. The first season was a good swing and like amazing episodes, and I love these characters. And then the second season should have established itself as like, this is part of Star Trek. And I don't think it set itself apart as being like, this is a season, this is a show that people talk about in the same vein as the original series or Next Generation or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And I wish that it would. And this episode and going into season 3 doesn't make it seem like it's going to be that for me. Especially if it keeps falling into all the traps that it does. And I don't know if it's an element of not having the like same number of episodes per season that the other shows were able to do. And that it's trying to like toe the line between being like, hey, we're a spinoff and we're also like have these characters that you love. And also we want to introduce new characters. And also we have like so many different types of things that we need to delve into and like lore that we have to tackle before getting into the territory of the original series, but also don't forget these characters that you love again and like and things like that. So again, I love this show. And how earnest it is and how much character and joy and enthusiasm that it brings to the table in terms of Star Trek. And I love watching it. But the more and more I talk about it, the less enthused I am about the show itself. Hopefully it can turn itself around, but who knows?
That's why part of me wonders for you specifically if like maybe not talking about it. But you know what I mean? Like we still need to be critical of media that we like, but there is something about Star Trek that like you could just kind of watch it and take it for what it is. And if you're able to do that, it might make us both a little less critical of the piece itself. And I think as someone that has more experience with like series of Star Trek, what I said rings true is that like it's not necessarily seasons that you remember or like it's episodes, and then it's the fact that it all came together in a series. Like it's the time you spent, kind of like Doctor Who, I would argue too. It's like you have these episodic like little adventures.
You didn't used to have like these season long 10 episode like arcs that had to tie itself together. And I can understand like not wanting to be that, but it feels like it wants to be that as well.
Well, I was just going to say, I think Strange New Worlds is trying to and is almost expected to check conflicting boxes. So we've talked about Discovery and how I've even mentioned like it wasn't for me. I'm going to watch it again because I love Star Trek and I want to know all the lore that I've been missing. But ultimately, Discovery wasn't working for me because it felt too much like it was trying to be like a dramatic show with a 10 episode arc about like these one or two specific people and their relationship. And I'm like, that's not like Star Trek to me. Star Trek is the entire crew rallying together, doing these little adventures. And now that Strange New Worlds is doing that specifically, where every week I get my little bite-sized chunk of adventure where everything wraps up, I'm like, oh, but I actually also kind of want to dig deeper. So it's like, how do you take a show that succeeds as an episodic but has the integrity to be something deeper? And I think right now with Strange New Worlds, the way they're doing that is by skimming the surface of being both. So it's not like you can't just throw it away as, oh, they just keep having one-off fun adventures. I watch this for joy and like sci-fi fun, but I also don't watch it necessarily for like the war episode. So how do you balance and where do you find the depth in that? And which one are they going to be? Or are they going to continue to tighten and polish and maybe give us more of the, what we keep saying, like you bring up a very interesting topic, but then you have to get rid of it within 50 minutes. So how do you dive deeper into things like being an Illyrian, or what does it mean to go to war? Or what does it mean to like have PTSD on a spaceship with the same amount of enthusiasm, integrity that they already have for the show? So we'll see.
And again, I think this show was done better with the most recent Battlestar Galactica, unfortunately, because it felt like it delved into like very similar themes, but also had like the episodes to give you like these one-off things and like all that. And again, I think it's to me all about like season length. It's like what we're like missing, you know? I feel like it has the potential to do both of what it wants to be. It's just it can't do it in 10 episodes.
We need more time.
You have to like choose a lane. And I don't know. I mean, the same thing, like I'm sure how many episodes does Lower Decks have? Like, is it
10.
like 10? Lower Decks,
but it like works for them.
But that's the thing is like animated shows seem, and the same thing with like Rick and Morty, you know, like does an arc, but also like has these very specific episodes that people love. You know what I'm saying? Like you don't necessarily you watch it for both. You can do this. You can draw that line, and I think animated shows do this so well because they're not so beholden to the, I guess, the seriousness of things, you know, and they have the ability to just cut loose, you know, because I guess we forgive it as a medium. So I know it's possible, and I guess I just feel like the Star Trek Strange New Worlds is just not drawing like that line for, or not towing that line for me, you know. I want to love it. I want to have been as hype on this season as I was on the first season. That's why we started talking about this. I really, really loved the first season. I thought it was going to be so much fun to talk about this one. And then they did things that felt so, I guess, trivial and underwritten, and just the cracks started showing more and more. I guess that, the rose-colored glasses were off for me.
I would be interested to have you go back and watch season 1, because we both kind of joked about the fact that for as much as we loved it, we didn't actually remember certain things that happened in season 1. I would be interested to have you go back and watch it now that we talk about it critically too, instead of you just being introduced to the world and these characters for the first time, to see if any of those cracks actually were there and you were just like experiencing the magic for the first time.
There were definitely things that were like the cracks were there. Because I can recall being like, oh, this show's like really interestingly like bad in some spots, but I just love the characters so much, know, and like the things that they was like, okay, let's wrap up each episode like happy-go-lucky, kind of like we did with sitcoms all the time. It's like that always kind of like bothered me, but it was fine because I loved like delving into these characters, and I loved spending time with these characters. I think the problem is that like you keep introducing deeper elements to these characters in season 2 because you keep trying to push them forward, but then you also try and go back and do the same thing where you wrap up their stuff or whatever, like by the end of the episode. And I'm like, well, that doesn't actually solve like the deeper things that you keep introducing. Like Spock, how he has acted throughout the majority of the season has been fine. I like the Spock that we have and how he like steps up or does, and how he acts with everyone, those kinds of things throughout the season. But then he introduces like, oh, this is a Spock centric episode and it's very specific in like, how do we like delve deeper? And then it ends up being like a rehash of things we've already rehashed before. And then you wrap it up anyway. And then it doesn't ever like, you don't ever really get into and then he just goes back to being who he is. Right. And I'm like, I would have preferred, just Spock being the way he was like all season and not try and, you know what I'm saying? Because like, there's probably like more interesting stories to do out there and things like that. And also if we're not going to actually like really dive deep into it, then there's no point, I think that I felt like there's these similar to Spock, these characters could have just been like who they were. And we could have like, gotten to know them as opposed to all the characters like telling us this is what we know about them or doing impressions of each other like we know them or all these kind of different things that felt like it's like, oh yeah, we should love these characters in the same way. But I was like, well, this is only our second season. Like we're still diving deep into them and we keep introducing new elements, but we're not paying it like, I don't know. And yeah, no.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm nodding. I'm thinking Pike, Chapel.
Pike didn't do anything this season either. And then we had like, it was all about his relationship. And then it all hinged on whether or not he would make a decision at the end. I was like, he always makes a decision, like that's again, like, why is this the cliffhanger here?
Well, the cliffhanger is that he has to make the decision if he's going to start this war, essentially.
I mean, I don't know that that's true because the war's already been started per se. He's trying to figure out like how to save certain people. There's like a whole lot going into that decision, but I don't know that we started the episode with Pike struggling with that. You know what I'm saying? Like being able to make decisions. I guess if him not being able to make a decision on where to vacation like plays into this, it's just not there, even if it is about a war or not. Like it's just not there. It's not hinted at. Like it doesn't make any sense in terms of like he didn't do anything like throughout the season to like play into this cliffhanger, Yeah, I'm gonna quickly and non-aggressively disagree with you in the sense that he is always so casually disregarding the rules. Not in the same way that Kirk disregards the rules, but he's always the person that puts like his family, his ship family first.
So whether it's Una being on trial, or like Uhura not feeling like she has a home, or if it's trying to open up to Patel, he's constantly like, or Spock, like he's like, we go after and we protect this family, this ship. Now he has to decide if he's going to protect his ship because he was told by the Admiral April, not to engage with the Gorn because this is in neutral territory. And if we fire on the Gorn, we potentially start the war, a war. Fine. He doesn't care about that because all he's thinking about is, I'm going to get my people, I'm going to leave. I don't have to fight the Gorn. Now he has to because his people are on that ship. So what does he do? Is it the needs of the many? Is he going to put the entire Enterprise in danger and therefore possibly the entire of Starfleet in danger to protect this handful of people that's still his crew on this Gorn ship? And I feel like that's where he struggles with the decision because his crew is his life. And when it is split, he's now going to have to decide basically, are his feelings for Batel and like the 3 other people that are over there more important than saving the rest of his entire ship or possibly starting a Federation war? I think that's going to be interesting to see him struggle with. I'm interested to see what his choice is because he is always someone that makes a decision. He'll make the hard decision, but his hard decision is always like backed by his love for his crew. So what do you do when it's split, when your heart is split into 2 places? I also just love Star Trek, so like I will talk my way into believing anything these people show
that's the
me.
thing. It's like I just don't see anything of what you just said in that decision making. I don't see any of those elements like coming into play. I feel like if the whole season there's been like different things that we've criticized, like where he's made a decision or where there's a lot of things that the crew has made decisions on his behalf, where man, the Enterprise would not be running the way it is. Like he would have been demoted. Certain things would have been changed. Like the Federation would not be allowing, Starfleet would not be allowing the Enterprise to be doing what it does. Right. And I feel like there's been no consequences for like any of the major decisions that they've made all season. And if they had driven home the fact that like, everything was like taken out of his control and someone else made a decision and he gave other people power and it led to this like moment where like he now has to make the decision and that decision hinges on whether or not he continues being like the captain of the Enterprise or continues being in Starfleet, or whether or not it hinges on his actual like ability to like be a leader or not. Like none of that. I wish that had been part of it, but it doesn't feel like any of that has like really come into play. And I feel like it could have been done in a better way and like maybe even hinted at more throughout the season. It just wasn't. You know, because there have been no consequences. Even when the Admiral like talks to him, he's like, "Hey, this is what, you know, this is where we are," and all that kind of stuff. It's not like Pike. If you decide to do something, like we will have no choice but to strip you of your command or what. You know, not even like setting up that. There was never any consequence for what he might or might not do. Even when he takes on the thing, they're like, well, we can't do this. It doesn't feel like there's going to be any consequence for what he's doing because they're like they're finding a loophole around it. You know, they're not exactly like engaged. You know what I'm saying? So there's not going to, because there have been no consequences before for the rest of the season of these things, it doesn't feel like there's any consequence or conflict or obstacle for what his decision could be here. The decision doesn't feel like a decision. We know he's going to choose what he's going to choose because why not? You know, like the Gorn are essentially attacking. They're bombarding the ship. Like you as a Starfleet commander, Pike or no, would decide to fight back or do whatever and go after your crew. War or not. I don't think it has anything to do with Pike. And I feel like because it's not internalized for Pike and for us in Pike's head that this could be any captain, any situation. It could be Picard, it could be Kirk. Like, of course, what decision are they going to make? We know what they're going to make. You know what decision they're going to do. And we haven't internalized that for Pike to why this is a huge decision, why he is frozen right now. Why is he frozen? Even if all this talk of war, the fact that he's maybe not been in the war, which wouldn't make any sense to me, but the fact that I guess he hasn't been, and all these other people have been to war, and he hasn't had to make a decision in wartime, I guess, you know, could be a major thing, but they never hinted at that before.
Well,
like, I'm just making that up.
No, I don't think so. You sound right. But also, if the Gorn are attacking your ship, it's also not just starting the war. It's now you're going to fire on your friends. He has to decide if he's going to possibly destroy a ship with Starfleet crew on it.
Well,
if he decides to fire phasers.
Well, right. Yes, but he would be firing at the tinier ships, not the starfighters, not the big cruiser that just came in. You know, like that. Like right now, the main threat is the ones, and they started it. They've already crossed the line themselves. Like not according to, I don't know how they made the decision. This is not a race that is quote unquote intelligent in that sense. Like who crossed the line at this point? It's them that crossed the line,
right?
Not Pike, not the Enterprise, you know? So it doesn't feel like a hard decision for them to be like, okay, great. Now the Federation's behind us because they crossed the line first.
Yeah.
Like that anyway. It's just weird that all this comes at the very end of the season could be and should be the most interesting thing, but was not hinted at or I guess foreshadowed or even like built into the rest of the season. That's my main criticism.
Yeah.
So yeah.
All right. Well, way to end our podcast on a high note here. That was
I still love the show.
I mean, it's a great show.
I still love the characters. I love the earnestness of it. I love what they're doing. I'm just like, man, that's like, why does the writing feel so weird and like not on par with like everything else that people are putting into it? There's a lot of people on this crew and this cast that are putting so much into it.
Oh yeah.
And they're putting a lot more than what the scripts are allowing. I think that's the main criticism, is that like, I love everything that everyone's doing. I want more of that. I just wish they were given that from the get-go. Yeah. So yeah.
And hopefully we'll see what season 3 has in store for us after the writer's strike finally ends and everyone gets paid their fair wages. We can hop back onto producing the 3rd season of Strange New Worlds. Mattias, 2 years from now, do you wanna maybe revisit the Enterprise and join me for season 3?
Are you saying for sure it's 2 years, or are you just saying that in terms of...
Well, they haven't started production yet, and if production takes a year, that's all of 2024. So we wouldn't be getting it until 2025, which is about VFX, 2 years from now.
The VFX artists might be unionizing too, so that might be might take longer.
So I'm ballparking probably 2025.
Listen, I'm down. Let's figure out what are we going to talk about in the meantime though? What's our
Well, you
next?
said you want to do Star Wars.
Sure, well, they don't know that.
Mattias told me he wants to do Star Wars.
Okay.
So we gonna do some Star Wars.
Okay. You want to be specific? You want to talk?
Go ahead. Mattias, what do you want to talk about? Tell us.
Okay. So that's the end. That's our review of Star Trek Strange New World Season 2. And yes, we will probably talk about, well, we'll see. We'll see how we feel leading up to things and how this podcast goes. That's 2 years from now. We can't plan ahead. In the meantime, what are we going to be talking about next? We're glad you're still here. Hope you enjoyed this podcast so far. We are probably going to talk about Ahsoka, the new series from Dave Filoni. We haven't talked about any Star Wars stuff yet. Obviously, we're big nerds, but we have been hit or miss on the Disney Plus shows, and in terms of like how we want to, but this is coming from specifically Dave Filoni, and who did Rebels and also worked on the Clone Wars, and people speak really, really highly of those. I hate to say that I've never watched any of the animated shows, but Dave Filoni has done some of, or been a part of the best episodes of the live action TV series, not counting Andor, because that's a different thing altogether. But in terms of The Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett, everything that he's introduced and the thing that he's brought back has been leading to what we hope to be Ahsoka. And I feel like if anyone could do anything, and if anyone has any faith in a predecessor to George Lucas and the Star Wars thing, it is Dave Filoni. And whatever he's doing in Ahsoka is going to bear fruit. And if you loved Rebels, you should love Ahsoka, supposedly, because he has complete control over it. And it feels like a direct sequel to the Rebels TV show. Seen it. And then is supposed to lead into the future of Star Wars. Star Wars is hard because it's not as going to be as in-depth, I think, as like our Last of Us discussions, but also is probably going to be deeper than something like The Mandalorian. And so we'll see. So we're going to give Ahsoka a shot. I think there's a chance that it can fit the mold, just like maybe the Game of Thrones does, maybe Andor does, and has potential to kind of like be somewhere in between Mandalorian and your typical like Last of Us kind of thing. Maybe not as hard hitting as that, but should have some like a lot of fun elements, a lot of good, I guess, sci-fi, fantasy, and a lot of good nerddom. I'll try my best to bring back the lore loft, even though I'm not as well versed in things as Shannon would be for Star Trek.
I'm annoying about Star Trek.
But I'm going to try my best to bring that back. I hope you guys will join us for Ahsoka. Now, that doesn't start until the 23rd, which is a Wednesday.
Like near the end of the month.
Because they usually come out on Wednesdays. Yeah, the 23rd. So it's the 11th now. So we have 1 week of nothing. And then we would start doing Ahsoka, which means our schedule's also going to change. Ahsoka would come out on Wednesdays. We possibly might talk about it on Wednesdays. We're thinking of changing our live streaming to a more mid-afternoon kind of time. So that might be Wednesday, or we might put it off until the Thursday, depending on our schedules and how it really like plays out and how much we might want to actually delve into the episode. If there's more that we want to wait on or talk about or gather from research before we talk about it, just really depends. I do have a feeling that just like most of the Marvel and Star Wars television shows, is going to be a lot of like table setting stuff that's like going to be really hard to talk about until it becomes like a whole thing. Mm-hmm. But I'm sure there's going to be a lot of things that Dave Filoni brings to the table that hopefully will make every episode a good sit or a good watch. Hopefully. Yeah, we'll see.
We'll give it a try.
And a good talk and a great conversation. So in the meantime, I guess do we want to just commit to taking a week off, or do we want to have people suggest us something? Because I know that
you know what, guys, I love you. Let's take a week off.
You don't want to talk about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Oppenheimer or whatever?
Oh, I haven't seen either of those movies yet.
If I can convince Shannon, we'll maybe talk about a movie.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm open to it. We'll see how it goes. We'll see how we're feeling next week, what our work schedules look like. But if nothing else, we will be back with Star Wars at the end of the month.
Well, this has been a long episode, as would happen at the end of any season. I know this series has not been our biggest in terms of popularity, things like that. Hopefully we can come back stronger. And again, we've done 2 shows now that we've kind of been like a little meh on. Unfortunately, hopefully Ahsoka will bring that back. No guarantees. We can only talk about what we want to talk about.
I guarantee Mattias is going to like this one more. You love all the Star Wars stuff.
There's a lot I like to talk about Star Wars. If it generates these like ideas and feelings for me, and and just like the general sense of characters and fun like elements to it. Like I'm sure there's enough to talk about.
Yeah.
So
maybe I'll be the one that's like, it was all right.
In the meantime, if you, since we have a week, you have plenty of time to catch up on this episode, and maybe generate your thoughts, maybe tell us what you thought about Star Trek Strange New World Season 2. You can email us at codependentcontent@gmail.com. We haven't gotten many emails in a while. You can also comment on our YouTube channel or repost these. You can also join our Discord. Links are in the description, in the bio, wherever you're finding this podcast. And you can join us on the Discord and bring up your thoughts and elements. Or if you happen to listen to this episode, please just join us because we do record this live every week. We're going to try and continue to do that with Ahsoka, and hopefully it'll generate some good conversation. We haven't done any like clips in a while, TikToks or whatever, and we would love to do more of that. And
we're definitely going to get back on our bullshit.
The more you engage with us, the more likely I am to like find a clip that will pick your brain or do whatever, get you talking and stuff. So we'll definitely look forward to hearing from you so that we can continue engaging with you on those other elements. So yeah, in the meantime, that's been us. Shannon, I guess I'll see you in 2 weeks, a week and a half, probably.
Okay.
For Ahsoka, there's going to be on Wednesday morning. You down for a little midday hump day kind of? That's not Shannon. You don't have to.
I'm 12. I'm a 12-year-old little boy. Yeah, I'm down for a midday hump day. Hang.
Thank you, chat. Thank you for everyone who's been here so far. We're glad you're here. This has been amazing. You're the reason why we keep doing this. And we'll hope to see you next time as well.
Bye.
I knew you were going to do that.